Most people throw out seeds without realizing they're discarding centuries of survival knowledge packed into something smaller than a thumbnail. These aren't just old vegetables. They're the ones that kept entire communities alive through famines, blizzards, droughts, and wars. 20 crops that refuse to die no matter what history threw at them. And by the end of this, you'll never look at a garden the same way again. Let's start in Pennsylvania, deep in Amish country, where generations of farmers built their winters around one tomato. Not the watery, thin-skinned kind you find stacked in plastic trays at the grocery store. Something far more serious. The Amish paste tomato was bred for one purpose: to last. Dense flesh, almost no seeds, thick walls that turned into rich, dark sauce when cooked down slow over a wood fire. Picture a farmhouse in October. The harvest is in, baskets overflow with deep red tomatoes, and the kitchen smells like something your grandmother's grandmother would recognize. Every jar sealed on those shelves wasn't just food. It was a guarantee, a promise that the family would eat through February, through March, through whatever came next. But the real story isn't the flavor. It's the defiance. While industrial agriculture pushed farmers toward hybrid seeds bred for looks and shelf transport, Amish families kept saving these seeds by hand, year after year, generation after generation. That's why this tomato still exists today. Not because a corporation protected it, but because ordinary people refused to let it go. And if that tomato represents quiet endurance, the next crop is its absolute opposite. Because this one was never quiet about anything. The fish pepper doesn't announce itself with a neat label in a seed catalog. It never had one. For most of its history, it lived in backyard gardens along the Chesapeake Bay, passed from one hand to another without ever being written down anywhere. Cream, green, and red streaks ran along each pod like brushstrokes from an artist who couldn't decide on a single color. But that beauty was almost an accident. The real reason people grew it was flavor. In Baltimore's oyster and crab houses during the 19th century, this pepper was the secret behind the seasoning. Young, pale pods brought a gentle heat to seafood stews. Ripe, fire-red ones turned up the temperature entirely. And because it never appeared in official catalogs, it stayed invisible to the commercial farming industry that would have standardized it out of existence. That nearly happened anyway. By the 20th century, the fish pepper had almost vanished. Industrial farms wanted uniformity. They wanted peppers that looked the same, shipped the same, and sat on the same shelf without variation. The fish pepper was too bold for that world, too different, too alive. Seed savers brought it back, and today it grows again, striped and defiant, carrying with it the flavor memory of a community that never got credit for what it quietly preserved. From a pepper that thrived in secret, we moved to a plant that could never hide from anyone, even if it tried. Because when it grows to 14 feet tall with a golden head wider than a wagon wheel, subtlety just isn't an option. The mammoth gray sunflower was never planted just to look pretty. On a working homestead in the 1800s, nothing survived on sentiment alone. Farmers grew these giants because they were useful in ways that stacked on top of each other. The seeds were protein-rich and could be roasted, ground into flour, or pressed into cooking oil. When real coffee disappeared during lean seasons, roasted sunflower seeds filled the cup instead. The thick woody stalks became makeshift fencing, and the towering height of the plants threw shade over beans and cucumbers below, protecting them through the worst of summer heat. A single sunflower patch was a pantry, a windbreak, and a garden companion all at once. And despite every wave of hybrid crop development that swept through American agriculture, this heirloom never disappeared. Seed savers passed it forward because they understood something the market didn't. Sometimes the most useful thing is also the most spectacular. But if the sunflower ruled the sky, something else was sneaking upward alongside it, something with purple streaks and an attitude built for survival. The rattlesnake pole bean earned its name honestly. Those dark purple markings curl along each green pod in a pattern that genuinely resembles snake scales. But the name also fits the way it moves. These vines climb aggressively, coiling up poles, fences, corn stalks, anything within reach, growing past 10 feet without slowing down. And they keep producing long after other bean varieties have given up entirely. That staying power mattered more than you might think. In poor soil, in dry years, in gardens that didn't have the luxury of rich compost or reliable rain, this bean kept going. Farmers across the American South learned to trust it because it delivered when nothing else would. Pods came in ready to eat fresh, ready to simmer in broth, or ready to dry for winter storage. every stage of growth was useful, and while commercial agriculture moved towards smaller, uniform beans that fit neatly into mechanized harvesting equipment, the rattlesnake pole bean stayed in backyard gardens, passed along by people who valued performance over packaging. Today, it's climbing fences again across the country, still coiling, still producing, still refusing to stop. Beneath those vines, a different kind of survivor sat quietly in the soil, waiting to be discovered. Because not every legend looks like one from the outside. The long pie pumpkin might be the most deceptive vegetable on this entire list. It looks plain, elongated, pale green skin, nothing flashy about it. But pull one out of a cool cellar in January and you'll understand immediately why New England families stacked these in careful rows every autumn like bars of edible gold. Other pumpkins spoiled, this one didn't. Stored in the right conditions, a long pie would hold for months, and something remarkable happened during that time. It got sweeter. The flesh deepened in flavor the longer it rested, which meant the pies and stews made from winter stores were actually better than what came out of the autumn harvest. That's not a coincidence. That's a vegetable that was built for exactly this purpose. Candlelit kitchens in the middle of February, snow sealed around the house for weeks, and on the table, a golden-fleshed pie made from something that had been quietly improving in the dark since October. That's the long pie pumpkin's entire personality: patient, reliable, and always better than it first appears. Modern supermarkets have no use for a pumpkin like this. They want round, uniform, photogenic. But homesteaders and seed savers understood what that plainness concealed, and the long pie is still here because of them. Now we go underground, where a different kind of survivor stores its strength in the earth. First developed in Louisiana in the 1980s, the Beauregard sweet potato spread rapidly across the world, and the reason is as simple as arithmetic. One plant, up to 10 pounds of tubers. That math made it indispensable almost immediately. But the numbers don't capture the full picture. The deep orange flesh is dense with beta-carotene and natural sugar, making it genuinely good food by any standard. And above the soil, the vines and leaves are edible too, giving families a continuous source of fresh greens even when the root harvest was still weeks away. Nothing from this plant went to waste. In drought years, when the soil cracked and other crops shriveled, the Beauregard kept producing. Farmers came to treat it like a form of insurance, an investment in a crop that would pay out even when conditions turned against everything else. Entire communities in the American South and abroad built food security around it, and they still do. Strength doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just keeps growing quietly beneath your feet. Moving from that underground abundance, we shift to a green that earned its place in history at one of America's most famous addresses. The lettuce grown in Thomas Jefferson's gardens at Monticello was not selected by accident. Jefferson was a precise and curious farmer who documented everything. This particular variety earned his praise for its tender leaves and dependable performance across seasons. And while its name may not instantly ring bells today, its pedigree goes back to the 1700s, and its qualities remain just as relevant now. This wasn't a lettuce bred for a truck journey across the country. It was bred for flavor, for texture, and for the ability to perform in real garden conditions without chemical assistance. Early American families ate it fresh in summer salads and pickled it in brine jars to carry that flavor through winter months when the garden went cold. That combination, fresh and preserved, soft and adaptable, was exactly what subsistence gardeners needed, and centuries later growers still choose it for the same reasons: reliability, tenderness, and a history that links a modern dinner plate directly to the earliest American farms. Staying power doesn't always come from drama. Sometimes it comes from simply being exactly what you need, every time you need it. But where this lettuce offered quiet dependability, the next heirloom earned its reputation by standing firm through conditions that would end most plants entirely. In Scotland, winter is not a metaphor. It's a serious, extended, frost-hardened reality. And for generations, farmers there depended on a leek so sturdy it could outlast the worst of what that season delivered.
The giant Musselburgh leek stood up to 30 inches tall, with thick stalks and broad leaves that didn't wilt, didn't yellow, and didn't give up when snow arrived. While onions retreated underground and other vegetables surrendered to the frost, the musselburgh stayed harvestable long after most gardens had gone silent. That trait alone made it essential. For working-class households that had limited storage options and couldn't afford for crops to fail, a vegetable that stayed alive in the ground through winter was worth more than almost anything else they could plant. Its flavor rewarded that loyalty. Mild, sweet, slightly earthy when simmered into broth. It found its way into traditional soups across Scotland and the British Isles, becoming both a kitchen staple and a cultural symbol. Not flashy, not fragile, built entirely for endurance. The giant musselburgh is still one of the most trusted leek varieties among home gardeners worldwide, because dependability never really goes out of style. From Scotland to Central Europe, we find another heirloom that breaks every expectation about what a vegetable is supposed to look like. The super schmelz kohlrabi looks wrong at first. Its bulb swells to a size that genuinely startles people, larger than a child's head, sometimes weighing over 8 pounds. If you've only ever seen small kohlrabi, this variety looks like a different vegetable from another planet entirely. And yet here's the twist. Despite that monstrous scale, the flesh stays crisp, tender, and delicately sweet. Eat it raw in thin slices and it's clean and refreshing. Roast it and it caramelizes into something deeply satisfying. The broad leaves, which most people throw away, can be sautéed or stirred into soups, making this plant useful from edge to edge. For centuries, Central European farmers valued it precisely because of that completeness. One kohlrabi pulled from a winter cellar could feed an entire household for days. In climates where storing food through cold months meant the difference between comfort and hardship, that was not a small thing. That was the plan. Easy to grow, forgiving in average soil, and capable of delivering one of the most generous harvests a single plant can offer. The super schmelz kohlrabi is proof that strange-looking crops are often the most serious performers. And from that earthy giant, we arrive at something that combines size with fire. A pepper that takes everything people love about jalapenos and multiplies it. The jalapeno gigante lives up to every word of that name. These peppers grow past 6 inches in length, glossy green deepening to red as they mature, and they load their plants so heavily that the branches need support to keep from bending under the weight. That productivity alone made them valuable for farming communities. One harvest, properly dried, smoked, or pickled, extended flavor across an entire year. But size doesn't mean the flavor is sacrificed. The heat level stays in a zone that's genuinely useful, hot enough to bring energy to a dish, mild enough to stuff, grill, or pickle whole without needing to be treated delicately. For communities that relied on preserved foods, a pepper that held its flesh and texture through the preservation process wasn't just convenient, it was essential. Where smaller peppers shriveled and lost substance, the jalapeno gigante stayed meaty and full-bodied, filling jars with preserved product that lasted. Fire and function in the same plant. And from that fire, we arrive at something that fed whole New England winters in a softer, slower way. The Boston Marrow squash built its reputation not through spectacle, but through consistent delivery. Bright orange flesh, mild and rich enough to anchor soups, fill pies, and carry entire winter meals. In cooler climates where fragile crops crumbled under harsh conditions, this squash climbed fences, sprawled along trellises, and kept producing. 19th century seed catalogs called it remarkable, and that language wasn't exaggeration. Farmers chose it not just for its flavor, but for its shell, which hardened after harvest and protected the sweet flesh inside through months of storage. A single squash could carry a family from October into February with nothing lost and nothing wasted. Before canned goods dominated the kitchen, before supermarkets standardized everything into 1 or 2 reliable options, the Boston Marrow was what New England families reached for. Its reputation was earned through genuine performance, year after year, harvest after harvest. But if the Boston Marrow represented reliability, the next heirloom on this list represents something closer to spectacle, sheer, staggering, jaw-dropping scale. There is one pumpkin variety that doesn't just grow, it swells. Under the right conditions, it gains up to 40 pounds in a single day, the kind of growth that sounds made up until you...
Under the right conditions and with serious grower dedication, these pumpkins blow past 200 pounds without much difficulty. The current world record sits at an extraordinary 2,749 pounds, held by a grower from Anoka, Minnesota. That number belongs in a different conversation entirely. But even at ordinary competitive weights, these pumpkins turned gardens into something between agriculture and theater. County fairs and global weigh-off competitions crown champions every season, and the competition is genuinely fierce. Yet behind the spectacle, there's real practicality. The flesh can be cooked into pies, stirred into soups, or used as animal feed. Most growers admit, though, that the real draw is the experience of watching something grow that fast and that large. It's nature doing something almost unreasonable, and it's hard to look away. From that ground-hugging giant, we shift direction entirely, straight up. In the warm fields of the American South, the cowhorn okra grew like it had somewhere urgent to be. Up to 8 feet of stalk, reaching skyward with long curving pods that could stretch past a foot in length. Named for the shape of those pods, which genuinely do curve like a cow's horn, this heirloom was built for the southern growing season and everything that came with it. The key advantage was longevity. Most okra varieties turn tough and fibrous if they're not harvested at exactly the right moment. Cowhorn pods stayed tender even at impressive lengths, which meant farmers could return to the garden day after day without racing the clock. Before refrigeration, that flexibility was invaluable. Less waste, more food from each plant across a longer season. Generations of Southern cooks fried it, stewed it, stirred it into gumbo, and counted on it through the hottest months. And the plants themselves, taller than most gardeners, became landmarks in the growing landscape, visible proof that the garden was working. From that upward reach, we spread wide across the soil for something that embodied Southern summer in a completely different way. The Georgia rattlesnake watermelon earned its name from the dark green stripes that run the length of its body, curling in a pattern that looks almost deliberate. For 19th century farmers, those stripes were a familiar and welcome sight. They marked a fruit that could grow to 50 pounds, stretch across 2 arms, and feed an entire gathering with one cut. In the sweltering summer heat of the American South, this watermelon wasn't a luxury, it was sustenance. Sweet, cold, and hydrating in conditions that drained everything from the people working the land. But what separated this variety from others wasn't just its size or sweetness, it was the storage. Most melons spoiled within days of picking. The Georgia rattlesnake held on for weeks. Families kept them in cool root cellars, slicing them open long after the harvest was over, tasting summer while autumn moved in around them. That longevity made it a bridge between seasons, a fruit that refused to end when the vines did. Seed savers have kept it alive through the years, not only for its flavor, but for what it represents. The persistence of people who worked hard soil and coaxed extraordinary sweetness from it. And from that sweetness, we turn to a root crop that carried a completely different kind of strength. Quiet, unglamorous, and absolutely essential. The purple-top white globe turnip does not try to impress anyone. Its round white root with a brush of purple near the top looks like exactly what it is, practical food. And for centuries, that's precisely what made it indispensable. Cold hardy and fast-growing, it survived in climates where more delicate vegetables simply couldn't. And it gave 2 harvests instead of 1. The roots swelled underground while the leafy tops provided a separate, nutritious food source that could be cooked down with broth or eaten raw. For households trying to stretch limited land into year-round eating, that double yield was not a bonus, it was the point. During World War I, communities across Europe survived stretches of genuine food scarcity on turnips. The infamous turnip winter wasn't named that way by accident. Hardy root crops like the purple top held families together through months when almost nothing else was available. That legacy might sound grim, but the purple top white globe turnip didn't disappear when better times returned, because beyond survival, it's actually good food. Roasted, mashed, or pickled, its mild and slightly sweet flavor holds up in any kitchen, and its reliability never stopped being valuable just because the crisis passed. From a root that sustained nations, we arrive at something that sustained both people and the animals they depended on. The mammoth red mango beet grew to proportions that made people stop and stare. Roots weighing more than 20 pounds were not unusual. Imagine a single beet, almost as large as a small child, pulled from the ground by a farmer who planned carefully because this crop was essential. In the 1800s, the mango beet was what kept homesteads running through winter. Its primary role was livestock feed. Cattle, horses, sheep. When pasture land froze and feed supplies ran low, entire barns were stocked with these massive roots. Without them, the animals that were themselves essential to farm survival wouldn't have made it through. But the family table wasn't excluded. The roots could be roasted or mashed for human meals, and the leafy tops were sautéed with simple additions into a dish that stretched dinner further without much effort. Agricultural fairs displayed these beets as evidence of what good farming could produce. Children marveled at the size, travelers noted them in written accounts, and heritage growers still treasure them today, not only for their remarkable yield, but as living evidence of a time when a single well-chosen crop made the difference between a farm that survived and one that didn't. From that crimson abundance, we move to a pepper with a completely different temperament, big and sweet rather than big and bold. The elephant ear sweet pepper got its name from the broad, floppy shape of its fruit, which genuinely does hang from the plant like something oversized and slightly surprising. Each pepper can grow to 8 inches, with thick walls and deep red color once fully ripe, and unlike thin-skinned peppers that collapse under heat or rough handling, these were built to hold their structure. That made them the perfect vessel for stuffing. Meat, rice, vegetables, the thick walls kept everything contained through slow cooking without falling apart. Roasted, they softened into layers of smoky sweetness. Eaten raw, they brought crunch and clean flavor without a trace of heat. In Eastern European farm kitchens, these peppers were workhorses, hardy plants that produced generously through the season and delivered fruit that could anchor a full meal rather than just season one. In lean years, a basket of elephant ear peppers could stretch across many dinners. That consistency was what generations of farmers valued most. From a pepper bred for generosity, we arrive at a tomato that took generosity to an almost unreasonable extreme. The Goliath tomato lives up to a name that doesn't leave much room for understatement. Individual fruits regularly exceed 2 pounds, heavy enough that picking one requires both hands and a moment of genuine respect for what the plant just produced. And the vines that carry those fruits grow thick and vigorous, reinforced by the necessity of supporting that weight through a full season. But large tomatoes often disappoint on flavor, trading taste for size. The Goliath refuses that trade. The flesh is meaty, dense, and balanced between sweetness and acidity in a way that makes it work equally well raw or cooked. A single slice covers almost an entire piece of bread. Cooked into sauce, it delivers depth that smaller varieties take multiples of to achieve. Historically, tomatoes like this represented real prosperity. A single fruit could feed a family at the dinner table. Baskets of them at a market drew immediate attention, and for the gardener, the Goliath delivered consistent yields throughout the season, making it a plant that earned its space every single year. From a tomato built for abundance, we arrive at an herb that delivers its own kind of oversized generosity. The mammoth basil doesn't whisper. Its leaves stretch across an entire palm, ruffled and broad and unmistakably bold in a garden bed full of smaller plants. Where ordinary basil gives you a sprig, this variety gives you something closer to a sheet of concentrated flavor. Tear one of those leaves and the aroma hits immediately. Classic sweet basil intensity, but amplified. That single leaf can season an entire dish. For home cooks preserving summer flavor into winter, this plant's productivity made it practical as well as spectacular. Baskets of these large leaves turned efficiently into pesto, herb oils, and dried seasonings that extended the harvest season by months, and it kept producing. Through peak summer heat alongside tomatoes and peppers, the mammoth basil stayed vigorous and kept pushing out new growth. Unlike more fragile herbs that bolt or collapse in the heat, this variety stayed productive exactly when the rest of the garden needed it most. Basil carries symbolism in cultures from the ancient Mediterranean to the modern kitchen windowsill. The mammoth variety extends that legacy into something that genuinely impresses rather than just accompanies. Aroma, abundance, and beauty combined into a single plant that justified every inch of the space.
And finally, from an herb of striking fragrance, we close with a plant that looks like garlic, behaves like garlic, but turns out to be something else entirely. Elephant garlic is one of the more genuinely surprising entries in any list of heirloom crops. The bulbs are enormous, clothes plump enough to fill a palm,
wrapped in the papery white skin that looks just like its smaller relative. But botanically, it's closer to a leek, and that parentage explains everything about how it tastes. Where regular garlic hits with sharp, assertive intensity, elephant garlic takes a completely different approach. Roasted, the cloves dissolve into a buttery, mellow spread with nutty depth and no aggression whatsoever. Even raw, its flavor is gentle enough for salads and thin preparations where regular garlic would overwhelm everything around it. That gentleness made it invaluable for households where garlic's character was wanted, but its intensity wasn't. And practically speaking, one bulb weighing close to a pound meant that a single harvest stretched into weeks of seasoning without needing to return to the garden. The plants themselves grew tall, sometimes reaching 3 feet, with stalks that turned the garden bed into something ornamental as well as productive. Adaptable in most soils, forgiving of neglect, and tolerant of cooler temperatures, elephant garlic asked very little while delivering consistently across seasons. 20 crops, 20 stories of refusal. Refusal to be replaced, standardized, forgotten, or erased by the push toward uniformity that reshaped modern agriculture. These vegetables survived not because they were lucky, but because they were genuinely worth preserving. Because the people who grew them understood something fundamental. Variety isn't sentiment, it's resilience. Each of these crops represents a specific solution to a specific problem. A pepper that hid in plain sight and served a community invisibly. A pumpkin that sweetened with time instead of spoiling. A bean that produced when the soil had almost nothing left to give. A beet that kept both people and livestock alive through winters that closed the world down entirely. The modern food system trades most of this away in exchange for predictability and transport efficiency. What's lost in that trade is hard to see until something goes wrong. And when it does, it's the old varieties, the heirlooms, the ones that refuse to vanish, that turn out to have the answers we need. Somewhere in your garden or in a seed packet from a heritage grower, one of these crops is waiting, patient, practical, and entirely capable of surprising you. Which one caught your attention most? Have you ever grown or tasted any of these heirlooms yourself? Drop your answer in the comments below. If this gave you something to think about, please hit like and share this with someone who loves to grow things. My channel has more where this came from, and we'd love to have you along for what comes next.